Welcome to the 56th anniversary at Avatars Abode. The home of God-man, Avatars Abode. Named by Mayor Barber during his four-day stay here 56 years ago. Barber had proclaimed that he is the manifestation of God, the God-man, the Avatar. It was his wish to name the property. He was not asked to do so. The original property of 83 acres was selected by Francis Bruford, who accepted the role of hosting Barber and his 4 accompanying disciples. Subsequently, a donation of adjoining land of 16 acres was accepted by Barber as part of Avatars Abode. Now 99 acres, 40 hectares. In 1967, Barber wished that a trust be formed to administer Avatars Abode. So, on behalf of the Trust and the Avatars Abode Anniversary Planning Committee, we extend to all a very big welcome to the home of God. We particularly welcome our specially invited guests, and I can't see anyone but Mahowan Merchant from India, Karis Arkin from America. Our gathering is further enriched by other overseas participants, Heather and Pat from India, Rainey and Renee from America, Ernest from England, and Marama from New Zealand. And perhaps an even greater welcome would be us lovingly greeting each other over the 4 days. With such an atmosphere, the Avatar will surely feel at home at his abode. The Trust's governing constitution has as one of its primary objects, quote, to facilitate the celebration annually in the month of June, the anniversary of Avatar Mayor Barber's visit to Avatars Abode. There is a very wide range of ideas on the appropriate way to do this. These opinions range from a program being entirely Mayor Barber focused to allowing a free expression by participants contributing their own heartfelt offering. Francis once said, "Barber loves nothing better than a good singing or dancing or a play to lighten his burden." And this year's program is again very diverse and hopefully caters to the varying viewpoints. For the first anniversary, Francis wrote to Robert Rouse, strongly suggesting that the 2 resident families have a day off work and eat their dinner at Barber's house. So we prepared a meal and had a kerosene lamp-lit meal together, and Robert sang a few songs. For the second anniversary, we performed Francis's play, The Bridge. The cast numbered 5 and the audience was 9. In correspondence with Francis in India in the 1960s, he would always want details of what was being planned for the anniversary and with encouragement for quality entertainment. In one letter to me, he stressed the importance of entertainment and said how he was not dismissing the possibility of Barber again visiting Australia. He was determined that there would not be a repeat of 1958 when the nearly 60 sahavasees had nothing prepared when Barber out of the blue asked to be entertained. The venue for anniversary events has changed over the years. Before this building, we hired marquees, and before that, all programs were held in Barber's house. At the back of Barber's house, there was tiered seating and a low stage in front of Barber's room. So today is the first of 4 days to celebrate May Barber's visit here 56 years ago. Many of us love him and tried to serve him. For some, this is very private and personal. Others, as part of their love, endeavour to please and serve him by offering something of themselves in the company of others. Through our 4-day program, some of these offerings will be shared in the form of music, song, dance, talks, discussion groups and various art forms. My offering at this anniversary is to share with you some impressions and memories of my visit here to Avatars Abode as a 15-year-old in May and June 1958. I was very raw in being able to absorb the concept of God-man visiting us. Yes, if I asked, I would say I loved him and would have sincerely been able to say I believed him to be God in human form. Actually, 2 years earlier in Sydney, Barbara asked some of the younger ones who he was, and my answer was, the greatest man on earth, which I remember pleased him. But in retrospect, the concept was well beyond me. It was not till 11 years later in 1969 at the Great Darshan, when bowing down to his empty chair, that I had my first real meeting. My first real heart-to-heart. Not in 1956 or 58 in Australia or 1962 in India, when I was so fortunate to have his physical proximity. My personal experience leads me to say emphatically that Barber is here now for times of intimacy and sharing his presence. On looking back, my first lesson from Francis, not appreciated at the time, was that hosting Barber also involved hosting all the other people. For the Bruford family, driving from Melbourne, Francis had said to phone him when we got to Landsborough. We met half an hour later at the service station opposite the Woombai School, on what was then the main Northern Highway. On Keel Mountain Road, he stopped his car and got out to point to this property on the summit. We came up Mayo Road, then unnamed and just 2 car tracks amongst the grass for most of the way and with no houses. And he stopped again at a wooden cattle grid to announce that we were now entering the property. There was no hint yet of how busy he really was. A few warm introductions, and then Francis was back at work. And after clarifying some specific jobs for when we were ready to start, there was certainly no urgency, just 3 weeks or so before Barber was due, but not a panic. It certainly looked to me like an impossible task, but Francis seemed reasonably satisfied with the situation. In Barber's house, the floor was only about a quarter down, the walls not complete, other walls were being painted, 2 walls in Barber's room were not built, the meeting hall had just 8 blocks of foundation concrete in the ground, and the whole place looked a mess. Truckloads of river gravel and large piles of cinders were yet to be spread by hand on the roads. My first going into the farmhouse was a memorable sight. People were making bunk beds, chicken wire being cut for the base of each bed, people making mattresses out of hessian and wood wool, which was scattered everywhere, and in the corner a pile of mattresses to the ceiling. This small 2-bedroom house was where all the cooking was done, and the women had their bunk beds. Under the house, bench tables were made for meals, with planks on 4-gallon kerosene drums for seating. The men were accommodated in 3 tents, pitched adjoining in a line where the Bruford house was later built. Barber did go into every room of the farmhouse and walked through the tents. One of my father's jobs was to help Francis tint the paint for the final coat to Barber's house. I considered it strange that with so much urgency in the air, so much discussion was going into colour tinting, how warm to make it, and how much different it would be when it was dry. Painting Barbara's house took more than just to paint. It was a similar story with the wooden turpentine boards on the walls in Barbara's room. Rather than just putting them up, Frances was heavily involved discussing which piece looked best beside another to provide the best matching tones. The task assumed critical importance. At the time, I could not appreciate the priorities. Frances, from the start, made it clear that my prime job was carting water from a spring, 2 buckets at a time, the 200 metres to the farmhouse. Apart from the kitchen, the water was required for women's ablutions. Frances insisted that the little water that was in the house tank could only be used during the gathering. Although this daily task went on and shared by Lorna Rouse's brother Ken, I today still don't know how they survived on so little water, although at the time Ken and I had some different ideas on the matter. On delivery of each lot of 4 buckets, we were often met by women in line waiting our arrival. At times the cooking could not wait and water was taken from the tank. I suspect at times in secret for non-cooking purposes. During the preparation, the men had different arrangements for bathing. After 5 o'clock knock-off time, the guys would gather near the spring, waiting for a bucket, and wash naked in the fading light in the company of mosquitoes. At least there was no shortage of water at the spring. The number 1 rule was no soapy water near the spring. A boarded small square at ground level. My number 2 job was working with 2 of the 3 paid workers that Frances had employed. The job was road making with hand tools. Not just the private road, but also along the government entrance road. Not only was this very hard work, but a real letdown. I was relegated out of sight from the hive of activity around Barbara's house, and my thoughts were that the road was good enough for cars to get in and out. It was certainly very important to Francis, and he was the boss. I suspect I was more interested in pleasing him than thinking of how we could in some small way ease the physical pain of our godman with a body broken from a car accident. As I said before, I was young and raw. 11 a.m. was always slow coming. That was when I could have a break from the road work and instead go and cart more water before 12 o'clock lunch. One rebuke from Francis was quite severe. Someone after lunch suggested to me that there was time for a quick lie down in the tents before 1 o'clock work resumption. I can't remember if I went to sleep, but it was barely 1:03 when Francis came into the tent and asked me what was the point of coming from Melbourne if all I was going to do when I got here was sleep. An earlier rebuke from Francis also hurt me, this time with hurricane lights. There were lots of them, and each morning they had to be filled with kerosene, another of my jobs. Soon after I had finished for the first time, Francis got very annoyed that I had not done the lights. I tried to protest, but he made clear that any fool should have known that the job also included cleaning the glass. The fact that I'd never seen the glass being removed from a light made no difference. Anyway, things improved for me. I was reassigned to help on Barbara's house. Perhaps this coincided with the unexpected news that Barbara was now coming a week earlier. I was asked to start nailing floorboards in Barbara's house. After some tuition, I was busy with this job, following the instructions. 2 nails per board in each joist. Again, Francis appears on the scene, and for a change the rebuke was relatively minor. He made it clear that we only had time for 1 nail. The second one could be done later. Later never came. You can still see where I changed from just 2 to 1 nail. A real urgency prevailed in the last week. People were ending their lunch break as soon as they had finished eating. In fact, some towards the end had their lunch taken to them. It was a matter of days before Barbara's arrival that Francis decided that the construction of the meeting hall could go ahead. The 5 o'clock knock-off had been abandoned, and some of the assembly and construction proceeded in the evenings with illumination coming from a series of cars, shining their headlights with engine running to keep the batteries alive. On the last day of preparations, Francis appeared all spruced up, having to go to meet Barbara in Brisbane, who would spend the night at the Bellevue Hotel. Unfinished work was still progressing. I remember Francis being apprehensive about leaving, and he said to us that he knew that we would all do our best. Then, as a final farewell, he got back out of the car and pointed out that all the empty cement bags could be gathered up and burnt. He instructed on this day that all work was to cease at 5 o'clock. However, a special dispensation was given to 3 or 4 of the ladies to continue making cushions for Barbara's chair and feet, and this task was continued in Barbara's house into the early hours. While we were gathered with Barbara asked Francis details of the preparation of the property, and Barbara expressed both delight and surprise about just what and how much had been done for his visit. Back in India, Barbara recounted to his close ones details of the property and its preparation for him, and said to them about Francis, "What daring." Looking back to being in Barbara's company, I now see him, amongst other things, as being a master composer and conductor. In relatively short periods of time, the atmosphere could naturally and seamlessly change between being light and happy to deadly serious, and then back again. When Barbara was discoursing on obedience, I was one of the gathering to be singled out and was asked if I would be prepared to go to school naked. I was in emotional overload, absolute panic, and then I saw what could be light at the end of a very dark tunnel. I thought I could get away with a sneaky answer and answered, "It would be difficult, Barbara." He let the topic rest. Also, looking back, I find it incredible at each gathering one always quickly felt that Barbara knew you were present and were welcome. Others have spoken and written about this, not a skill that can be learned to such perfection. A retrospect theory I've developed in the incredible double act performance, the retrospect theory I have developed is the incredible double act performance from Barbara as he spoke through Erich. As Erich spoke, Barbara's body language was almost always in perfect synchronisation with the words of Barbara that Erich spoke. So much so that it would be easy to forget that Erich was there. But I have since realised that not only was Barbara synchronising with Erich's voice, he was also first having through sign language to get his message and words across to Erich. Perhaps this would not be so remarkable if there were breaks after every phrase. But no, Erich could often speak for Barber without noticeable pauses. Perhaps Erich was more attuned to what Barber would want to say than I have ever realised. When we individually received a farewell embrace from Barber, I received quite a shock. Of course, I knew that Barber was keeping silence. What I did not know was that the silence did not exclude all noises. It was such a loving embrace, but his physical condition was again revealed to me by what I can only recall as a sigh of discomfort. It was too late to try harder for a smoother road for him to travel on. So, let us now continue the program as we in different ways endeavour to entertain and praise our beloved in celebrating his stay at this is Australian Abode.